Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's lesson. We're on day 2 of essay writing, and I had a look at the essay writing documents today. I see a few of you still haven't gotten onto your document. Maybe it's because you're still working at your King Lear project. You don't want to leave that too long, though. You definitely don't want to try to rush a good essay, especially when that essay is going to represent the apex of your evolution as a public school student. So don't leave it too long. I expect to see everybody on their document at some point today. At least have a look at it and start adding in your evidence. At this point, I would expect that people are still in that stage where they're gathering all of the evidence that you're going to use to determine what your thesis is going to be. Make sure that you don't try to approach a thesis statement backwards. Don't try to decide what you're going to argue and then scramble to find the evidence to prove it. You want to find the evidence first and let it lead you. So I learned something about suffering tonight. My son and I are taking karate lessons. We're just starting out. We're yellow belts, so we're not very good. And there was a fellow came to the dojo tonight. He was a former student. He's an RCMP officer out in Alberta right now, and he's back on holidays. So he came, and it was sparring night. So towards the end of the session tonight, we put on our safety equipment, and we got into the ring to fight. And one of the hardest kicks that you can throw in karate is a back kick. Just imagine like a mule throwing a kick, or a horse that comes straight back with a lot of power. And he drilled me right in the ribs, like right there. And just absolutely, it wasn't like he wasn't being malicious. It was just like the perfect kick. And it hit me squarely and absolutely stopped me in my tracks. Now, the pain that I felt was, it was a type of pain that I've never felt before, actually. It made me want to cry and laugh at the exact same time, if that makes any sense. It's weird. It didn't hurt, like it wasn't a sharp pain. It was like a dull throbbing, like just, I think it was just the shock, just the absolute shock to my system. And it was just the strangest thing. I had to stop. I had to go take a walk and try to calm myself down. People were worried about me that I was injured, but it wasn't that. It was just a weird reaction to the whole situation. So I learned something about suffering, if you want to equate pain and suffering. But there's something else I learned too. As soon as I was able to, I went back and I went looking to fight against this guy again. Not because I wanted to beat him, not because I was angry, but just because I wanted to try again. And I wonder why. Why? So what would drive a person to go back to a suffering that they've already experienced and escaped? Think about it. Here I was. I could have easily just said, "Oh, I'm injured. I can't keep going," but I didn't. And it's not because like I'm some valiant guy. It's not because I'm a conquering hero archetype. I don't even really know why I did. It's just I felt like an impulse to get back upstairs and get back into the ring. But this is the type of thinking you're going to have to do in order to come up with a thesis statement. The thesis statement is the essay itself. Just like every essay you've ever written, once you have your thesis statement and enough evidence to back it up, your essay is pretty much done. It's just math equations from there on in. Writing is about patterns. Good writing is about patterns anyways. And academic writing is very much about patterns. A good essay is very predictable as a piece of writing. My suggestion is follow the patterns. And the patterns are laid out pretty good in the essay writing document I created for you. And you already know what the patterns are that I'm looking for. In your body paragraphs, I'm looking for topic sentence, and then the state quote explain pattern, 3 units of that, and then good solid concluding sentence. And I mean, this is grade 9 stuff. This is not new to you. What is new to you is the idea maybe of creating a comparative essay where you're writing paragraphs in sets. I know ADHS students should know this, but I don't know what's going on at all the other schools in the county. I don't know if comparative writing is part of your curriculum, so this might be new to some of you, but it's not really it's nothing that should throw you, really. The idea of a comparative essay is that you're going to show similarities between these 2 novellas, or you're going to show differences. You're going to show the way that they compare or the way that they contrast. And you're going to be looking at certain elements of literature and meaning, and you're going to be comparing them, or you're going to be contrasting them. So I want to do a little bit of an example for you using Heart of Darkness and King Lear. Both of these novels are certainly about suffering. I don't think that there's any question there. Hopefully you notice the suffering in Heart of Darkness, and it's very hard not to notice the suffering in King Lear. The suffering in King Lear and the suffering in Heart of Darkness, how do they compare? How are they similar? So some of the things that you would want to think about are, what are the causes of suffering? What are the effects of suffering? How does suffering influence people? You can deconstruct it a little bit. The general idea with suffering is that it's a bad thing, but is it? Do they show that suffering is a bad thing, or do they show that it's necessary? I think that we could make a comparison between these 2 works and use that as our thesis, that both of these works show that certain amount of suffering is necessary for progress. So here's the comparison that I would make. In Heart of Darkness, if you want to take a cold, imperialistic look at what's going on, suffering is necessary in order for colonialism to work. The people of Africa have to suffer in order for the people of Europe to get rich. And there's your white sepulchre again, all glamorous on the outside and filthy on the inside. Europe, though, I don't know if any of you have ever been there, but if you ever get a chance to go there, you'll probably be awestruck by the architecture of that continent, of Western Europe I'm talking about. But from that point of view, if you want to buy into colonization, suffering is necessary. Without suffering, there's not going to be the flow of wealth back into Europe. And without the flow of wealth back into Europe, Europe does not become the dominant continent in the world up until the 20th century. What about King Lear? Is there a comparison? Well, I think we can make the case that suffering is necessary in order for the country of England to improve. By the end of the novel, the leadership of England is much better than the leadership at the beginning. If we think about, what kind of leader would Lear have been? He was a fool. He couldn't have been very good. And then his daughters were terrible leaders. They could run the country, but they were awful people. And you'd imagine the amount of suffering that they would have caused, given enough time in that country. Kind of making a comparison of what it would be. Scotland under Macbeth, I think, would have been very similar to England under Regan and Goneril. So there's a lot of suffering that happens, and at the end of it, Albany and Edgar, like the 2 strong characters in the novel who've got integrity and goodness, the ones who are left, are in charge. So we can make the comparison that suffering is necessary for progress. That could be our essay thesis. All right. We could also write an essay where we're not showing a similarity, where we're showing a contrast instead. And some of you may have, maybe in a place right now where you're like, oh, the two novels that I have don't seem to be very similar in what they say about suffering. That's not a bad thing. That could be a great thing, because a great comparative essay can show the contrast between two works. So in what way is suffering, or what way is the suffering different, the nature of suffering different in King Lear and Heart of Darkness? Well, if you want to take a Buddhist approach to the whole thing, the Buddhists believe that desire is suffering. The idea is that you reach enlightenment by coming to terms with your desires and basically reaching a place where you don't desire anything anymore. Desire is suffering for sure when it comes to King Lear. Lear's desires lead to his suffering. That's very clear. His desire is he wants all of the good things about being king and none of the responsibilities. And that motivation is what causes him to abdicate the throne. And doing that is what creates all of his suffering in this play. We show the opposite about Heart of Darkness. Well, in Heart of Darkness, desires lead to other people's suffering. They don't lead to your own. It's like, because the idea with the Buddhist take on things is like, when as you desire things, you suffer, because anything that you want but can't have, that increases your state of suffering. And anyways, the desires in Heart of Darkness lead to the suffering of other people, because when we take a look at who is suffering in Heart of Darkness, it's not the Europeans. They're not suffering at all. They inflict suffering on other people. So, for example, the pilgrims opening fire for fun at the Africans as they're leaving the inner station is a great example of my desire to shoot at you because I can, because this is Africa and I'm a white European colonist, leads to your suffering. Or my desire for ivory leads to the destruction of your village and leads to your head on a stake, that sort of thing. So what we could do is, in this case, is we could build a thesis that shows contrast instead of comparison. That these two works show two different ways that desire leads to suffering. One being my desires lead to my own suffering, one being that my desires lead to the sufferings of other people. All right? So either way, it doesn't matter if you are comparing or contrasting. And you know what? If you want to get right down the nitty gritty of it, it's possible to write comparative essays where you're showing a degree of comparison too. But that's just, it's very complicated to write those papers effectively. The approach to choose either that these two works are similar or these two works contrast is a much more straightforward approach, and I think is going to lead to a better essay. So those are the two methods that I would like you to consider. So think about your novellas. What do they say about suffering? Its causes, its effects, the influence it has on people, the degree to which it is a negative thing or a positive thing. Is it a necessary thing? Is it avoidable? Is it unavoidable? What is your novella saying about suffering? Try to figure that out by gathering evidence and looking at the evidence and reading into it and seeing, what does the evidence actually say? And that should lead you to your thesis, because if you've got enough evidence from both novellas, you should be able to see a comparison or a contrast. And once you see that, you've got your thesis. And once you've got your thesis, you've basically got your essay. All right, so get on your essay document today. I want to see everybody on there. I'm going to be on this morning, giving you some feedback for those of you who were on yesterday, for those of you who are not on. If you get on early enough, I'll give you some feedback too. But and then I'll try to check in the afternoon as well. But definitely do not leave an essay to the last minute. The best papers are created not by just intrinsic ability. It's created through writing process. Getting that rough draft and then polishing.